My
Can you hear
video
me?
on? Yes, my video's on. Okay, we're up and running. And this thing
Perfect.
should be recording. Let me
Great.
see. Yeah, we're recording. So I'm so glad that in the 5 or 6 years that I've known you, you finally found a place where you're appreciated and wanted, and it's Japan of all things. So how are things going for you there?
Well, I've been watching your YouTube channel since the beginning. As far as I remember, it started around 9 years ago, maybe 10 if I'm correct, where you began the How the Humongous series on YouTube.
Right,
And I've always wanted to do something like this, especially in the last year or so that I've been more in touch with TJ Kirk, who I don't remember exactly how that somehow or other we got in contact, or I don't remember which chicken or the egg came first, but that's how I got in contact with you and then him. And it just sort of happened over the period of somewhere around 8 or so years ago. And yeah, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and do. All I described it as was a question and answer segment.
right.
I'm really glad that you were game for this because I've
And who's
watched all your
Kirku?
videos as well. And who's
Who's
what?
Kirku?
DJ Kirk, the amazing atheist.
Oh, yes, TJ. Yes,
Yeah.
my mentor in
So,
YouTubing.
oh yeah, it's definitely something that I remember was your videos used to be featured on his channel as well,
Right.
and that's
Yeah.
that's how I
And they
first became aware of what you were doing here on YouTube with
and
Howard the Humongous.
so what would you like to discuss in an interview?
So your videos tend to cover certain subjects that I find particularly interesting. That, uh, especially, you seem to have recently mentioned the field of mass behavior,
Yes.
um, especially as it relates to upcoming technology, including social media that's already existing. So I think that it was some kind of interesting subject that has become more relevant. Maybe you predicted this, but it's almost kind of become the most stringent field to be in the know about in the current climate that we live in.
It is vital. And the common wave right now, there's a mass hysteria about social networking. And there's a bill
Mhm.
in Congress to outlaw children under the age of 13 from using social networking at all. Um, and then to require that when you're 13 to 18 years old, you can only social network with your parents' permission, and they have to file things like your birth certificate in order to prove your age and to prove that they're actually your parents and all kinds of stuff like that. And then the government's supposed to keep records of all of these birth certificates and other documents that are submitted to them. So there's a fear. I mean, on television, if you watch things in the United States, like Morning Joe, the very popular morning program, or another one is Stephanie Rule, who does a very popular nighttime program. They are all paranoid as hell about Mark Zuckerberg and about Facebook and about social networking in general. And they are constantly calling for regulation of social networking. Well, Jojo, my attitude is fuck them. For one thing, adults have been doing this to kids since the days of Plato, 2,300 years ago, almost 2,400 years ago. That is, they've seen a new technology arise among their children. And up until now, they've had control of their children because their children are 4 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old. But now their children are going through a very vital total body change. They're going through adolescence, and adolescence forces them to become sexual and to reject their parents and to go out and find peers, people their own age, where they find acceptance. Parents cannot tolerate that. So Plato was panicked by the new technology that was catching on with kids in his age. And he said it was going to destroy the minds of children. It was going to destroy the Greek culture. Why? Because the quality of the Greek mind depended on an exercise when you were very young of learning the Iliad and the Odyssey, the two foundation documents for Greek civilization, learning them word for word. And that gave the Greek mind its discipline, said Plato. And the new technology was going to eliminate all that. So it was obviously going to destroy the mind of kids. And the new technology was called, are you ready for this? Writing. Then in the 1580s or so, or in the 1590s, the town fathers of London, again, panicked by kids crossing the barrier into adolescence and becoming independent human beings and sexual competitors. The town fathers of London panicked because there was a new form of entertainment that was popular among kids that they were sure was going to sexualize the kids and turn them violent and destroy them. And they actually passed a bill outlawing this new form of entertainment. But the kids of London were lucky. This new form of entertainment had a fan in the royal palace, the Queen, Queen Elizabeth. And Queen Elizabeth put a stop to banning the new form of entertainment. Well, the new form of entertainment was theater, and its most prominent writer was Shakespeare. And today, you know, they were certain that Shakespeare was going to dumb down the minds of kids and yank them by the ankles down the primrose path to hell, drag them. And today we give Shakespeare to kids in the hope that we will make them smarter and more ethical and moral. So then in the 1930s, you had another wave, another outbreak of this adolescent entertainment panic. There was a new form of music, and it brought with it a new form of clothing and a new form of dancing. And kids would, these newly sexualized kids would go to these dances and have a great time. And there were bishops in the United States who wrote long tracts explaining that this new form of entertainment was going to yank kids down the primrose path to hell and utterly undo them. And the new form of entertainment was swing. Swing music. Well, guess what? 10 years ago, that generation of kids who were raised on going to dances and listening to swing music, dancing to it, those kids were called the greatest generation, meaning the greatest generation America had ever had. So did swing music cart them down the primrose path to hell? Obviously not. And today's form of panic about adolescent entertainment is panic about social media. Now, look, social media has to be neutral. Social media is like the telephone. In 1876, Bell invented the telephone. By the 1930s, it was spread all over the United States. And the laws did not blame, and there was an active communist party from 1917 on, from the time of the Russian Communist Revolution on in the United States. And guess what instrument those party members setting up secret cells in the United States used to communicate with each other? The telephone. Was the telephone company sued for the fact that people in favor of armed revolution against the United States of America were doing their organizing using the telephone? No. The telephone network was a communications network. It had to be neutral. It was taken for granted that it merely provided the means. And then how you used the means was up to you. And if what you were doing was criminal, you go after you, not after the cables, not after the Bell network. And that's the way that social networking should be used today. And it's outrageous to outlaw the use of social media for 13-year-olds because, look, my second marriage, my first marriage was destroyed by chronic fatigue syndrome, by being in bed for 15 years with a serious illness. In my second marriage, I became the father of a 10-year-old kid. And his mother was abusive. And he escaped from her abuse by going into the bedroom, by going on Halo and playing games with other kids, by having a telephone in his ear at all times with his best friend. So his best friend was with him everywhere. These were the electronic means of the year 2000. And cutting him off from things like that would have been savage. He would have been even better off if instead of just the telephone and just Halo, he'd been able to social network. Because if he'd been able to social network, he'd have been able to find more than just one friend. Friends who resonated to his frequency all over the world. And since we are what our social connections make us, we cannot live without social connectivity. To deny kids social connectivity who may be lost and alone is criminal, in my opinion. So this entire panic is criminal. Now, there's another reason that I know how powerful the internet can be. It's that I started a scientific field expedition into I wanted to get to the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. And I went into a field that I initially knew nothing about, rock and roll. And I founded the biggest PR firm in the music industry and helped build careers or sustain careers for people like Prince and Michael Jackson, Bob Marley, and Billy Joel, Paul Simon, a whole bunch of others.
I remember that because I've asked you before if you were still interested in doing some of that work. And
right, exactly. And I'm
in
totally out
collaboration
of
with
it.
myself.
Because remember, I came from science. Science had been my life since I was 10 years old. I'd been into microbiology, theoretical physics, and then a whole bunch of other sciences. By now, I have published in scholarly journals or have lectured at scholarly conferences in 12 different scientific fields. So eventually I was going to go back to my science. That's where I came from. But in 1988, look, I love to work. And I've always worked 7 days a week. And I was not just working my ass off to build a company in a field where I was told that I'd be out of business in 6 months, that what I wanted to achieve was unachievable. But I was working under tremendous stress because you get a client, you become something in here, in your heart, something in your empathic system becomes, you ingest your client. Your client becomes an indispensable part of you. And if you lose a client, it's like an amputation. It is incredibly painful and incredibly difficult to recover from. So I was working under the kind of stresses that a fighter pilot undergoes in the thick of war. And fighter pilots are sent into combat for about 2 weeks. And then, because every minute they're in the sky, they're using every sense they've got and every bit of energy they've got to stay alive and to down the enemy. They can't handle that for more than 2 weeks. So they're sent off for 6 weeks of rest and recreation to recuperate before they're sent back into battle. Well, I was in that pilot's position without any days of rest at all. I went for 8 years without a vacation. So in 1988, I broke down. I was hit with chronic fatigue syndrome, though there wasn't a name for it yet, otherwise known as myalgic encephalomyelitis. And I was confined in my bedroom for the next 15 years. So, and for 5 years, I was too weak to talk and too weak to have another person in the room with me. What saved me? Well, back in 1983, if you can believe that long ago, there was this new thing that academic scientists had that I didn't. And I was furious with envy. And it was this new invention that DARPA had sponsored called the internet. So an entrepreneur had brought the internet to the music industry, and I had bought into it right away. So I'd been on the internet since 1983. Now, when I first got onto the internet, it was such a dark and lonely place that when Peter Gabriel saw I was there, he rushed over to say hello because it was cold,
Mhm.
empty, and lonely for him too. Well, it evolved, and it took me 3 years to realize I was trying every day to struggle to my front room, which is an office, um, to sit in my favorite work chair and to work. And at first, when I was lucky, I could do it 8 or 9 hours a day, then only 4 hours a day, then only 2 hours a day, then only 20 minutes a day. And I realized that my body was trying to tell me something, that I had a limited pool of energy and I had to spend it wisely. And I was spending too much of it trying to sit up. So I had my assistant install 2 computers next to the bed with a single monitor and keyboard with which I can control them both. Why two computers? Because computers in those days had probably 1,000th the power of your cell phone. Um, and I went out on the internet. And Jojo, the internet saved my life. It was the only place where I could live. I wasn't able to talk, but I could type. Now, there was one day when I was too weak to even lift my fingers to the keyboard, but that was only one day. And the rest of the time, I was able to type. So I went out into this bold new blankness, the internet, and was allowed to find other people who resonated to my frequency, which is not easy, especially when you're under those conditions. I was able to romance women, which is very important to staying alive if you're single, because my wife had left me because the burdens of taking care of a person who's stuck in a bed for 6 years had become overwhelming to her. And she left after 6 years. Remember, I would be through this, I would be in this for 15 years. And I was able to research. So I wrote 3 books while I was in bed, thanks to the word processor, the computer, and the internet. And I founded 2 international scientific groups while I was too weak to talk. Um, so the internet saved my life. And the idea of anybody denying anyone, even children, the internet is something that makes me furious because you're denying what for me was life itself. And it can be the same. Remember, when I was a kid, nobody in my hometown of Buffalo, New York wanted me. Other kids wouldn't have anything to do with me except when they were beating me up or humiliating me. And my mother and father had no interest, period. If I had had the internet, I could have found other people like me. If I had been allowed on social networking, I could have found my tribe and I wouldn't have been so alone and isolated. The question is, if I had not been so alone and isolated, would I have found science at the age of 10? And would I have made it an essential part of my identity, as essential as my ribs and my arms? Um, I don't know. But I would have found far more comfort in life than I was receiving. I would no longer have been a lonely child. So deny kids the internet because you're panicked about them becoming sexually independent creatures, and be mildly anti-Semitic because Mark Zuckerberg is Jewish, and use that to amplify your
That is,
hysteria about him.
mm.
Is that acceptable? In my book, absolutely not.
So two things come up that I know that this is a tale as old as time when it comes to the fear mongering about new technology. Uh, Two things in particular make people really feel justified in their witch hunt against the internet, if we can call it a witch hunt.
I think it's
Uh,
a valid term. It's very similar to what was going on in the witch hunts of the 17 or 1680s, whenever the Salem panic occurred.
Yeah, and uh, I wanted to also mention that I forget exactly what year the first major mass shooting occurred in US history that most people uh, kind of set as the benchmark, the precedent, so to
I
speak,
think it
would
was
have been the
Columbine.
Columbine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
that's
don't
what I was
remember how
going
long ago
for.
that was.
I feel that it was in the 90s. Like I think I was already in elementary school when that happened.
Right.
because there was a little bit of a moral panic at that time. Nothing compared to what's going on now, but there was definitely people had concerns about the role of violent video games and movies and television and
Well,
service
let me
of
tell you something
causing
about that
young
before you get
boys
any
to.
further in the question, the violent video games thing. So I got into rock and roll by being offered a job as the editor of a national magazine, and I didn't ask what the national magazine was about. I had previous experience writing about things that I knew nothing about, and caring deeply about my audience, and doing deep research, and coming up with important material. I'd done that for the Boy Scouts of America, even though I had been tossed out of the Boy Scouts at the age of 11. They allowed me to write their handbooks on stalking and tracking and camouflage, even though I cannot find my way into the woods, much less out of the woods. And I wrote with absolute commitment to make sure that if you read the book I had written on stalking and tracking, you could get within nose touching distance of a bunny rabbit before the rabbit realized you were there. I was dead serious about this stuff. So I had learned that I could write about anything as long as I loved my audience and had ample research material. So I was asked if I wanted to edit a national magazine, and I said yes. And let me take a backward step here. I said yes because when I was 11 years old, when I was 10 years old, I started a habit, reading 2 books a day. I read 1 book at school under the desk, and I read another book when I got home. And it was all science fiction and real science. And so when I was in 8th grade, a girl did something that was startling to me. I didn't realize that no one ever looked at me. And she not only looked at me, she made eye contact, which I had never experienced before. And she said, I told my mother you understand the theory of relativity. At that time, it was said
Oh,
that
yeah.
only 7 men in the world understood the theory of relativity. So I didn't have the courage to confess that I didn't understand the theory of relativity, because this is the only thing I was known for. They called me the sickly scientist. Um, and so as soon as school got out, I got on my bicycle. I pedaled down to the little white library building under stately elm trees near my house. And I ran in, and the librarians literally knew me better than my mother did. They literally took more interest in me than my mother did. And they'd been accustomed since I was 10 years old to letting me do something forbidden, to read any book I wanted in the adult section, not to be limited to the children's section. And I despised children's books. So at any rate, I said, "Give me everything you've got on relativity," and they rummaged through the stacks and they shoved 2 books across the counter to me. And one was a great big fat book by Einstein and 2 collaborators, and the other was a little skinny book by Einstein himself. So I put them in my bicycle clip. I pedaled home as fast as I could. I ran up to my bedroom and I started reading the big fat book, because at that age I had learned that if you put yourself through the most difficult process available instead of the simplest, you don't think you're understanding anything while you're reading it, but when you get to the end, you've understood something. So I tackled the big fat book. And the big fat book was all equations with about 7 words of English per page. And I don't understand equations. I've never understood equations. So I got 50 pages into it and looked up at the clock, and it was 8 o'clock at night. And my mom would put me to sleep. I knew at 10 o'clock I only had 2 hours left in which to understand the theory of relativity. So I gave up on the big fat book and I turned to the little skinny book by just Einstein himself. And in the introduction to that book, it felt as if Albert Einstein had personally reached his fist out through the page, grabbed me by the shirt, by the lapels, and said, "Schmuck, listen up. To be a genius, it's not enough to be able to come up with a theory only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory, then express it so clearly, so deliciously, that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it." So that became marching orders for me. Learn to write. Learn to write so clearly and deliciously that you can reach anyone. So I didn't care when I got this offer of editing a national magazine, what subject the magazine was about. And you couldn't look up who you had an appointment with in those days on Google because there was no Google. So I had no way of figuring out what magazine publisher I was about to meet with. I mean, what he published. And when I got into his office, he said, well, our magazine is called Circus. And I thought, clowns and elephants, I don't really like them, but I can write about them. And he said, no, 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 it's about rock and roll. So that's how I got into the rock and roll business. And so what point was I making with this story? But there is another point. And the other point is I had never had a teenagehood. When I was first let into the library at the age of 10, I was a little old man. That's why I would only read adult books, and I despised juvenile books. And there is something called deprivation, as in sleep deprivation. Well, a friend of mine, Jaak Panksepp, an acquaintance of mine, a colleague of mine, did experiments on mice. Mice are social. Mice hang around in a bunch. They crowd in with each other. They basically hug each other all the time. But when they're young, when they're pups, they play with each other. So Jaak tried an experiment separating the pups so they couldn't play with each other. Then when they turned to adults, when they became adults, he let them loose to socialize with each other. And guess what? They played the exact amount of time they would have played if they'd done it all when they were kids. So he discovered play deprivation. Well, I had teenage deprivation. So this was an opportunity, editing Circus Magazine, to come to understand the minds of the teenagers of that moment in time and to be able to put them empathically within me and thus get the teenagehood vicariously that I had never had a chance to experience. So many years later, when I would meet Michael Jackson, who had been not only play deprived, but childhood deprived, I understood exactly where he was coming from in his love of children, because I did that for teenagers for 2 years, and I increased the circulation of the magazine 211% without initially knowing anything about rock and roll. So I forget what issue I was. What issue was I on, Jojo?
Well, we're talking about the current fears of technology, social media, how it relates to mass behavior. And I just wanted to make the point that at the time of the Columbine shooting, there wasn't, as far as I recall, any serious legislation aimed at banning video game and violent movies
That's
like
it.
there
That's
is
where I was
now.
on. Okay, so let me finish the story. So one day, I was walking up Park Avenue on the way to work, and I had discovered that my audience wanted one star above all others, and they wanted him in every issue. And his name was Alice Cooper. And his act was based on dressing as a woman and going on stage and chopping up baby dolls. So my question was, Bloom, are you contributing to the violence of society by promoting this act that chops up baby dolls on stage, that is overtly and deliberately violent? Or are you providing exercise for the animals in the mind? And what I meant by exercise for the animals in the mind was um, I think it was the Seattle Zoo, once upon a time, bought an ocelot. And ocelots are beautiful cats. And they put it in a cage for display, and it rapidly lost its beauty. Why? Because it was tearing at its own fur, and it was tearing out clumps of skin and making itself very unhealthy and very unsightly. So somebody got a bright idea. The ocelots live off of capturing live birds and killing them and eating them. And they put a chicken, an unplucked chicken, in the ocelot's cage. And the ocelot used the same reflexes that it used to tear at its own flesh to tear the feathers out of the chicken. In other words, the ocelot had needed exercise for one of the algorithms in his brain. And if he couldn't get it the way it was designed to work by plucking chickens, he was going to get it one way or the other. So the question is, was promoting Alice Cooper possibly diminishing the violence in society by giving it a harmless outlet? And that question was answered by history. And it was answered in the following manner. When the first really, really, really heavily violent video game came out, one that appalled everybody. What was it called? It was about cars and
Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto. So when that came out, the alarmists were going crazy that it was going to add to the violence of society. Well, it came out roughly 1992. And from 1992 on, the violence in America decreased eventually to half of its previous level. Now, there is no necessary, there is a correlation between the popularity of Grand Theft Auto and this cutting in half of violence. It would take a lot of work to determine if this, remember, correlation is not causation.
Not causation.
If indeed the violent video game was exercise for animals in the brain, and as a consequence diminished the violence in society. But you could make that case because the evidence is spectacular. The decline in violence was unbelievable.
Well, I've definitely played Grand Theft Auto in my day, and I've never committed any kind of violent crime. Again, it's no correlation, no causation between the correlation, but I think I turned out okay in terms of not shooting or running over anybody.
Yes, good.
So it's a question I pose not out of genuine lack of an answer. I'd like to hear you lay out exactly why, like you were. It's a ridiculous reason for people to be up in arms about this, and even more than they ever have been in terms of, in my opinion, much more concerning, scapegoats for their technological fears.
Right.
Now, I brought up that there are two things that are kind of creating this cultural exceptionalism for why now, of all times, they're going after what their kids are using. It can change by a generation, but it happens to be social media today. And it's not about the social media, in my opinion. They are most concerned now than at any other time, in part because, yes, the internet does increase the visibility of things that they don't want kids to be aware of. But that thing in particular are two things. And the first, of course, is when kids nowadays get access to the internet, they become what is colloquially referred to as, they become doomers. They start to learn about facts concerning climate change. They start to learn about facts concerning history, short-term, long-term historical events, and they become quite astute as to the nature of where we're going as a species, and it turns them into little pessimists a lot faster than they should at that age. And that's one cause. The small part, in a yin and a yang, there's a small black dot in the white section and the small white dot in the black section. So the small part of their concern is that it's turning kids into pessimists, it's turning them into climate doomers, and it's radicalizing them towards leftist ideas. But the biggest problem, and this is why it's interesting to have this conversation with you at this time, is the biggest reason why parents are concerned about kids now with this particular technology for these particular reasons is because they are concerned that their children are going to become like me. They're concerned that their children are going to become gender questioning and outside of the binary. They may even desire some kind of gender affirming care before they're even adults. And that is the thing that is currently the wedge issue. It may be overstated, a vocal minority, or kind of played up to a large extent. But when I look at what people are saying about the current cultural back and forth between whatever we refer to as the left in America, which I'm far left of that, and the increasingly move to the right Overton window effect. Discourse in America has turned into a battleground of people claiming that all the problems that are happening right now are because of what they, the leftists, are allowing to happen to their children. And they'll use terms like mutilation. They'll say that, oh, left and right, the crazy woke mob is rounding up kids and imbuing them with this new gender ideology that's causing them to want to cut off their genitals. And I wish that I could be making this up, but this is exactly what's happening these days. And if you keep up with the videos in particular that the amazing atheist TJ Kirk has been putting out, half of his videos in the last 2 or 3 years have been about responding to this new cultural craze of the transgender panic, because the technological panic recurs in every generation, like we've established. But now they're stepping up to levels of legislation that are unprecedented. And I don't know if I was going to ask if this banning of internet use for under 13 is a federal law that they're suggesting, or if it's only specific
Federal
states.
law. It's a bill that they want to pass in Congress and the Senate.
Yeah, and even when it comes to certain states at the state level are going after transgender rights, not just for children but for adults as well. In certain places like Kansas, Texas, Kentucky, Arkansas, Florida, and increasingly more as time goes on, I see the connection that at the state level, they're targeting transgender rights, especially under the guise of protecting children, while they also roll back legislation to put children back into dangerous factory work because they can't reel in adults for their minimum wage pay anymore. And at the federal level, as you said, the new legislation to get to what's causing the problem that they're trying to solve at the state level, which is kids having an identity of their own that is ideologically incompatible with the fundamentalist Christian-based morality that this country believes wrongly that is the sole proprietorship of the country's way of being and thinking. Of course, I know that you're an atheist, and I grew up without religion in my household, and only recently have kind of moved from hard atheism into an open-minded, hippie agnosticism, where today I would even describe myself as Buddhist, because there's no consequence for describing oneself as a Buddhist. I don't have to go to church. I don't have to interact with other people. It's a perfect religion for somebody who's a little bit antisocial. So I wanted to pose a question to keep on the theme here that I'm asking a question, because I don't want to explain the depths of the horrors of what people are planning on doing to people like me in America, to the extent that I'm now filling out refugee paperwork so that I can keep my ass in Japan, where the most people will do is talk about how they don't like gay marriage. They have not even heard of transgender people here in Japan yet. So I'm safe because I blend in. And it's interesting how much you talk about the necessity of social connection at a time when the only social connection that I have at this time is my cat and people, I guess, like you said, that I talk to on the internet. And that brings me to the question. So there are, in my opinion, legitimate existential concerns that are affecting anybody who's paying attention to new developments under the age of 40, maybe 50. And I would call it, the Gen X, Y, and Z are extremely concerned that by the time we from age 20 to 50 are from age 50 to 80, if we are alive at that time, whether we're to be blown up by nuclear war, hit by another mega pandemic, or something of that nature. Most concerningly, climate change. The young generations now are wondering, what's the point of doing anything? What's the point of getting an education if I'll be in debt for the rest of my life, for instance? I dropped out of college after studying for maybe 5 semesters because not only was music a degree that would have absolutely no value in the real world, um, I didn't want to create any more financial burden for myself or anybody else in America, where education is a financial burden for some reason. So the question is, do young people have a legitimate uh, existential concern that warrants this new wave of pessimism and doomerism that's leading not only in America, but also in places like China with their Bailan movement? Are we onto something that we're starting to look at the future and saying, I know your videos always end with it's your job and mine to build the future that we want. Young people now are giving up on building a future that's any better than where we were in 2006 before the financial crisis.
Well, you're
Are
absolutely
we
right
out of
about
our minds?
you're right about climate doomism trapping kids in a total lack of hope. But it's at an ironic time when there is more reason for hope than ever. There's more reason for hope than ever because we do have an internet. There's more reason for hope than ever because we carry these computers in our pockets. There is more reason for hope than ever because if you go on to this simple little device, your cell phone, you can talk with ChatGPT or you can talk with the Bing Chat, which is ChatGPT 4, as I understand it. What's more, life since 4 billion years ago, when life got started on this planet, the odds that it could garden and green this planet were zero, Jojo, because this was one of the most catastrophic climate change obsessed planets you've ever seen. It went from night to day every 3 hours. A day was 6 hours, not 24 hours, which means that if you've been somewhere on the surface of this baby Earth, you would have been exposed to something utterly, appallingly dangerous for 3 hours of the day, and that's called radiation, and it makes life almost impossible. And then you would have swiveled around to become the dark side of things, and you would have been put through 3 hours of something equally challenging, darkness, total lack of light. What's more, the temperature would have gone up approximately up and down 88 degrees every time you swiveled from the bright side to the dark side. That was one major climate change. There was another. There was a tilt to this planet. And because of its tilt, you went through 4 major climate changes a year. We now call them summer, winter, fall, and spring. But they were climate changes. They were the things that you could use to argue that life can't possibly exist on this planet. And then there's another kind of strange wobble that produced massive climate catastrophes every 22,000, 42,000, 100,000, and 420,000 years. That's called the Milankovitch cycle. Climate catastrophes. So this planet was a poison pill of stone, and it was the home of climate catastrophe. And yet somehow life pulled itself together on the surface of this poisonous planet and managed to overcome the obstacles of all the poisons and all of the climate changes. And it managed over the course of 4 billion years to garden and green the place. Well, there are other poison pills of stone hanging above our heads, waiting to be gardened and green. And life, whether we like it or not, life is an imperialistic, colonialist enterprise. Life tries to expand into every space that it perceives. And at first, every new space seems like a cataclysmic danger. And then life manages to take hold of the cataclysms and use them as part of its metabolic machinery or its cultural machinery. So we are now in the position to take life to other poison pills of stone, which is what life's imperative is spread and adapt to new circumstances. And the reason for this hope is because we have been sending 3 humans into space at a time, 4 humans at most into space at a time. Elon Musk is building a rocket ship that will take 100 people to space at a time. Elon Musk is building a rocket ship that can be refueled in space, take you directly to the surface of Mars, land you there, so you can build a habitat out of modular equipment, prefabricated modules. And then when you want to go home, it'll take you home again and land you on Earth. One vehicle that's designed to give you luxury cruise-like comfort. That is altering the relationship between ecosystems and space. It is giving ecosystems the opportunity to set up on, as I said, other poison pills of stone and turn them from dead stuff into resources for life, because one of life's primary commandments is kidnap, seduce, and recruit as many dead atoms as you can and bring them into the grand enterprise of life. So the future is vast, and America is far ahead of any country because of one single man, Elon Musk, whose politics I find obnoxious. But look, Jojo, in 2005, I was dragged screaming and kicking to my first space conference. And at that conference, I heard this guy who went on stage and said, when I got out of college, I asked myself what 3 things would do the most to transform humanity in my lifetime. And my answer was the internet, alternative energy, and space. And apparently I have some sort of alarm in my gut that goes off when I see a superstar or a person of mythic proportions. And that gut up instinct went off with Prince. It went off with Shaka Khan. It went off with Joan Jett. And these people were unknown when I started with them and helped them build their careers. And that alarm in my gut told me, this is a man of mythic stature. Kids will be following his example 110 years from now. And he was Elon Musk. So I spent 3 phone calls with him, and I could not tell him why I needed to talk to him. And it was because that alarm had gone off, and it took me 10 years to articulate that in words. So eventually said, look, I'm very busy. I have other things to do, and we don't seem to have a point to these conversations, so I think we should end them. That's unfortunate. But that's who Elon Musk really is. Despite his obnoxious political opinions these days, really obnoxious, the fact is he's single-handedly is going to expand the bounds of life in ways that have never happened before. And so far as we know, have never happened before in this universe. So there is this vast horizon ahead of us. There is this vast commandment from nature and life itself. Spread me. Spread me. Let me green and garden other poison pills of stone. Let me kidnap and seduce and recruit as many dead atoms as possible and bring them into the grand enterprise of life. Don't be selfish. Don't hog me on this planet. Don't imprison me. Let me free. And those are the commandments ahead of us. The Chinese know this. The Chinese don't feel they're living in a dying civilization. They feel they're living in a civilization that's just getting a start. The Chinese dream that's in the Constitution of China, Xi Jinping has inserted it into the Constitution of China, says that humans, meaning Han, meaning Chinese people, are going to take over the entire universe and turn it into resources. That's in the Chinese Constitution now. So, look, I co-founded and I co-chaired the Asian Space Technology Summit in Kuala Lumpur. And you could feel that these Asians see themselves at the beginning of something, not at the end of something. Well, frankly, we Americans are even more at the beginning of something than they are. We have the means to produce advanced microchips. We are producing the new technologies that work on this vast space called the internet. And we are fortunate to have an immigrant from South Africa, Elon Musk, who is about to give us access to space in ways that no generation of life on this planet has ever seen before. It's like when plants invented pollen. Pollen was a way to take themselves, pack themselves into a little package, and send it a long distance on the winds. Why? To spread life. To spread life. And we are inventing something similar to pollen, long distance traveling, with the opportunity to go to the moon, to Mars, to any of the planets of, or any of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. So this is the beginning. This is not the end. And when I addressed that first space conference I was dragged to, I tried to tell them two things: that a nation that looks up goes up. A nation that looks down goes down. A civilization that looks up goes up. A civilization that looks down goes down. And America needs a vision transplant. Civilizations flourish when they see a vast new landscape ahead of them, not when they think that they have reached the carrying capacity of their environment and need to stop, that they've run out of resources. Okay, have we run out of resources? Is that real? Or is that a doomist fantasy? There are bacteria right now, 12 miles beneath your feet and mine, turning raw rock, dead atoms, dead molecules into the stuff of life. They're eating their environment. They're called chemolithoautotrophs, and the litho means stone, because they are eating stone. Well, for every ounce of living stuff on this planet, there are 200 million ounces of dead stuff waiting to be kidnapped, seduced, or recruited into the process of life. Bacteria know that. Now, are bacteria nature, or are bacteria mad capitalist rapists? They're not mad capitalist rapists. They are nature incarnate. And if they can do it, we can do it. What can we do the bacteria can't? Yes, they can go 12 miles beneath the surface of the earth. We can go 120 miles, 240 miles, 360 miles above the surface of the earth. And up there, there are whole new ball poison pills of sound waiting to be turned into environments. So, yeah.
Well, I definitely understand that among all the things that we share in our outlooks on things, there's almost there's almost an impenetrable barrier between the way of Gen Z and millennials, particularly thinking about this subject, and the I want to say the kind of classic school of modern science that came up on the Apollo missions and came up on the space race with the Soviet Union. And I just have to speak on behalf of the people in my age group and younger, that even we feel that even if Elon Musk does succeed to build a vessel capable of carrying people to Mars, and to somehow spread civilization there, with the work of humans rather than with millions of years of evolutionary biology, we are going to line up in picket lines to express our feeling that if there's going to be spatial expansion, it's not fair for it to be relegated only to the millionaires and billionaires, especially the billionaires who have access to money, while people on Earth are starving, dying, homeless, exposed to diseases, exposed to, heating, climate, and becoming relocated because of rising sea levels and rising heats and dust clouds that cover Manhattan all the way to New Jersey from Canada, and things like of this nature make people in my age startlingly, for maybe the first time of generational history, we're at a point where the young people want to settle down and start farms, while people that are one or two generations above us are looking to the stars and still remember the moon landing. Um, and it's an interesting reversal of the generational roles that the young people are now interested in the earth, in making a degrowth future where we're installing solar panels everywhere that you would have people living, um, where we're doing away with uh, cars, even if it's electric cars, because we're able to easily find information about the cost of electric batteries on not only the environment, but on human labor, and the fact that it's almost unavoidable for slave labor to be involved in um, global economics like that. So I want to make sure that it's absolutely understood that people in my generation are 100% not on board with Elon Musk. And whether it's political or in terms of his vision for humanity, getting a little bit hoarse here, um, we're generally anti-Muskers in the sense that we don't trust him to even run Twitter properly, let alone advance humanity to another planet. Now, is it a good concept removed from the personality of Elon Musk? And that would make us much more agreeable. Now, we would love to go to space with the likes of Keanu Reeves and people that we like, but we generally, as young people, have not only a complete distrust for the billionaires, but we're talking more and more about uh, how we would definitely prefer a world without them, even if that means bloody revolution. And we know that that's not possible within the current situation and any fathomable imagination. But it is in our imagination. I've met people who will descriptively uh, expulge into their fantasies of getting revenge on the billionaires. So that disconnect between the young's attitude on letting certain billionaires lead us into their vision of the future versus our own vision, which is we just want to have a roof over our head with solar panels, Wi-Fi, and a vegetable farm. And
Well,
it's
that
a
is very
completely
reminiscent of the
opposite
night
reversal.
in the 1960s. You know, I accidentally helped start a movement, the hippie movement. And the hippie movement was very big on leaving the cities and going to the countryside and starting farms and starting communes. But one thing about civilizations, a generation will only go so far as its visionary leaders can take them. And visionary leaders are people who are not only capable of having a vision, but are capable of instantiating it, reifying it, turning a fantasy into a reality. There are very few people like that. In 1905, the person who did that was Henry Ford. People could have complained in 1900 that these new things called automobiles should be abolished. Why? Because only the super rich could afford them. The middle class and the poor had no way to afford them. They were made by hand. And then came Henry Ford. And Henry Ford changed the shape of industrial civilization. And what he really did was he took the car, which was unaffordable, and he made it affordable to every middle class household. And he did it deliberately. He was a visionary capable of reifying, turning into reality, his fantasies. Now, I hate Henry Ford. One aspect of Henry Ford was such a violent anti Semite, I'm Jewish, that he wrote a book that Hitler kept on his desk and used as one of the foundational books for the Nazi movement.
Oh, I'm
Should
aware that vice versa. There was an absolute connectivity on both sides that they were fans of one another.
Yeah, and the difficulty is, so should I really hate Henry Ford? No, as a visionary and a society changer who made complex goods available to people who could never afford them before. I mean, today we regard a poor family as poor, even if it owns a car and a television set. And that car is thanks to the work of Henry Ford. Elon Musk is another one of those visionaries. Billionaires. Jeff Bezos is another one of those visionaries. When we went into lockdown over the COVID-19 crisis, all of a sudden, the only person to save us was Jeff Bezos. He had built a system that allowed us to order stuff that would show up within 2 days or less. The amount of stuff flowing into the building I own, the Bloom Brownstone, to my tenants was astonishing. It still is. Jeff Bezos gave us an entirely new modality for shopping, and a modality that means that I, a person who am so committed to my work that I try to do it every waking minute of the day, and my girlfriend says you do it when you're sleeping too, because I have news running when I'm sleeping. So I try not to waste any time doing things that other people can do for me. And yet I can buy something in 60 seconds to 3 minutes on Amazon. Yesterday, Nature Briefing came out with a study that said that taurine extends the lives of mice, roundworms, and a bunch of other creatures. So I took time out from reading Nature Briefing, took 30 seconds out, went over to Amazon, looked for taurine, and ordered a bottle. That was impossible before Amazon. Jeff Bezos has changed. He has upped the quality of our lives in substantial ways. That's how he got to be a billionaire. Should we destroy the people who upgrade our lives dramatically, who increase our powers? Not at all. I mean, there may be billionaires who simply get their billions by shuffling money around. That's different. But these visionary leaders are the people that we need to cherish and nurture more of. And they include billionaires. If people are really successful with their vision, they often become billionaires. So I see we've reached 7:01, and I should go to my work. But I could do another hour on some of the issues you raised: scapegoating, why it occurs, the current obsession and witch hunt with transgender people. All of these are rich, rich subjects, on which I have a lot to say. but we'll have to cut off just so that I can do the rest of my work.
Well, I would absolutely love to do it again, because we've only just scratched on some of the questions that I wanted to get into with you. So maybe this could be a part one of something to come, but it's been lovely.
Okay, so we will do it again.
Sure, that sounds wonderful.
And it's a pleasure to meet you this way, because you have nourished my life by being in it for
wow. Thank you.
10 years or so. Because there were times, especially before Coast to Coast, my radio show, my 545 radio station show that I do at 106 a.m. every Wednesday night. So before they made me a scheduled regular, I would wake up very often feeling I'm useless to the world and I should really get rid of myself. And the fact that you were there through all that time helped sustain me. Yeah, you.
I can't believe that. Well, I guess that I would say the same thing to you.
You're this way too. You need validation. And or you get severely depressed or worse. So you understand exactly what I was going through, and that was my situation. Now that Coast to Coast has made me a regular, I don't wake up feeling that way anymore, because I know that on Wednesday I'm going to be given this assignment 3 hours or 4 hours before the show: become the world's greatest expert on the following topic and report on it. And I always thought that, yes, I'm good at book writing, I'm good at article writing, but there's a form of writing, no matter how hard Einstein urged me to become a writer, there's a form of writing I will never achieve. And that's the kind of writing that newspaper people do, who get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 2 o'clock when they have to go to press, they've got a story. They've researched it, they've written it, they've perfected it. And now I've proven to myself that I too can do that because I do these scripts for Coast to Coast on very little notice. So I'm not as needy as I was before this happened and before the Howard Bloom Institute was founded. We do meetings every Tuesday night, and they certainly make me feel needed because they feel my work should sustain after I'm gone. So yes, we will repeat this, and yes, I have you to thank for helping bolster me.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And to you as well, Howard. I've definitely been inspired by your work, and I continue to be so. So let me know when we'll do that, and I'll look forward to it. So thank you
Okay,
very much, Howard.
terrific. And I've got to, as soon as I can, within about 5 minutes, Uber Conference will send me the video recording of this. So do I have your email address?
Yeah, so I kind of expected that you might upload it on your channel, but if you prefer for me to upload it on mine, I could do that as well.
Okay, which would you prefer?
Well, I don't really have a preference because we both are kind of uploading videos to a very small audience.
Right.
It
Okay,
doesn't
so
make
we'll
too much of a
upload it
difference.
here to my 15,700 subscribers, and
Okay,
I'll get my video person to do that. So
wonderful.
so have a one. What time of day is it there?
It's morning. It's just about 8 a.m.
8 a.m. Amazing. Well, have a good morning, and I will see you again soon.
Thank you, Howard.
Okay, thanks,
Bye now.
Jojo.